fleeting glimpses of things seen through a veil darkly. Do we understand the meaning of these visions of life? Why we are here and how little of our existence we truly understand? Tonight we will talk of these things on The Other Side. Welcome to The Other Side. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you once again. And we've had our current guest on the program before, and we're really talking to him about his continued spiritual journey and the insight that he has gained and would like to share with everyone through that journey. It's an interesting story. I would recommend you go back and listen to our first show with Garnet Schulhauser. And we talked to him, I believe, before about his book, Dancing Forever with Spirit. Now he has a new book out that we're going to discuss today, Dance of Heavenly Bliss. Garnet is a retired lawyer who lives in Victoria on Vancouver Island with his wife Kathy and his little dog Abby. He grew up on a small farm in Saskatchewan and moved to Calgary after law school, where he practiced corporate law for more than 30 years with 2 blue-chip law firms. He lives in British Columbia, from whence he's calling us today. And Garnet, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you for inviting me back. Delighted to be here.
Now, I don't want to recap your whole story because we did a full show on that, but just kind of a thumbnail sketch. I mean, you were kind of a hard-charging lawyer, as I recall, and you had this spiritual epiphany. Can you just kind of give us a short synopsis of that so people know where you're coming from?
Sure. It was back in 2007, and I was still practicing law. And yes, I was very much of an A-type personality corporate lawyer. And I was walking down the street one sunny afternoon in May, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a homeless man jumped in front of me and just stopped me in my tracks. And he looked like a typical homeless man, except that he had these amazing, dazzling blue eyes. And I felt like his gaze was penetrating deep within me, right down to the depths of my soul, and that he knew everything about me, even though we'd never met before. At the same time, he was sending me this wave of, I felt like a gush of pure, unconditional love that was sort of infusing my whole body with an amazing sense of peace and security and well-being. So it was a wonderful feeling. I stood there like a deer caught in the headlights until he broke the spell by saying, "Why are you here?" He promptly disappeared into a nearby store. And when I finally collected my wits, I went into the store to try to find him. He was nowhere to be seen. I walked back out on the street and walked up and down for several blocks trying to spot him, but he had seemingly disappeared into thin air. So the very next day, I came back to the same street at the very same time, hoping to spot him. And sure enough, after 10 or 15 minutes of searching, I found him sitting all alone on a bench. And I walked up to him and I said, "Who are you and why did you stop me the other day?" And he said, "I'm a soul just like you. I'm here to help you on your journey and answer your questions." And that was the beginning of a dialogue I had with this man that went off and on for the next few months. And I found out early on his name was Albert, and he was one of my spirit guides who had come to confront me in his homeless man disguise to get the conversation started. And so he answered all the big questions in life, like who am I, why am I here, what's my life's purpose, and what happens to me when I die. He answered them very truthfully and in a way that just felt true in my heart in terms of in comparison to what I was raised with as a Roman Catholic youth. His answers seemed to make a lot more sense. And so at one point during our conversation, he said, "I'm not here just to satisfy your curiosity. I want you to write a book about my revelations so they will be available to everyone." And that led to my first book, Dancing on a Stamp. And then he came back into my life after that one in a slightly different venue. He just showed up in my bedroom one night. I woke up sort of startled. I heard a noise. There was this ghost-like ethereal figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom. And then as it moved closer to the bed, I could see it was my old friend Albert, except he was in astral form. And he said to me, "Come on, I'm going to take you on a series of astral trips to the spirit side, to other places in the universe, because I want you to write about what you hear and see in your next book." And so that led to my second book, Dancing Forever with Spirit. Then he came back into my life again for my third book, same way, in astral form, in my bedroom, unannounced. And just led me on another series of astral trips, which he asked me to write about, and that led to my third book, Dance of Heavenly Bliss.
So he came back. Why this book? Why now? I mean, is there like an evolution of the information? If I understand correctly, there's some very timely kind of things included in this book.
Yeah, he had a very set sort of timetable. He never told me where to be going or the reason for it. He just said, "I want you to write about what I show you and what you hear," because in his view, it was something that was that humankind needed to hear. And he had a sort of he played it out in the way that he wanted to on his own agenda, and I just sort of followed him. and I just wrote about what he showed me. And in some cases, it's obvious why he showed me some things. It's sort of a lesson for humanity or a nugget of wisdom for all of us. In other cases, I'm not quite sure why he did. I'm still puzzled by it, and he doesn't offer explanations. It's sort of like, stick with me. I know what I'm doing, and, just follow my lead. So I do.
So, mankind, why do we need to be attentive to this message at this time? I mean, it sounds like there's some frightening things maybe coming down the line. Why now?
Well, because as Albert has told me, and also the Council of Wise Ones on the spirit side have said, is that we're at a crucial point, humanity at a crucial point in our civilization. And we need to tread carefully, or we could end up destroying ourselves, just like some of the other earlier civilizations on Earth, like Lemuria, Atlantis, and a few others we haven't even heard about. And he said, we're very advanced in terms of our technology, but our emotional and spiritual intelligence has not kept pace. And all too often we let our negative emotions like anger, fear, hate, greed, and so on get out of control, and that leads to wars and conflicts and murders and terrorist acts and so on. All the violence we have on our planet is because of negative emotions running amok. And he said we really need to get control of that, because we have weapons of mass destruction that, if unleashed, could destroy all life on our planet. And they don't want to see that happen. And they really think that we really have to focus on what we're doing and change our course before it ends badly for us.
I think about it, and to what you're saying in terms of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, I hate to say it, but I think right now, if you look at history, and it doesn't matter if you're politically on the left or the right, or you're pro-Trump or you're anti-Trump. I mean, to me, that I think it's dangerous whether Trump's president, whether Clinton's president, whoever's president. And you're in Canada and I'm here in the States, but in terms of what happens with America, it affects the whole world. And I worry about things like rogue states attacking. It's funny to call them that. The good old days, you pretty much had the United States, the Soviet Union, and China that had sufficient nuclear weapons to blow up the world. And now you're looking at states like North Korea and Iran and so forth that are coming online with this nuclear capability. North Korea certainly already has it in a significant way. Now they're getting the technology to put it on ICBMs, which really is terrifying. To me, leaving the spiritual aside, just looking at from a geopolitical standpoint, I don't think mankind's ever been in a more dangerous situation.
Yeah, I entirely agree with you, Jim. The start of World War III could come from anywhere, like you say, North Korea or Iran or whatever. But once it starts, it can just spread rapidly, and we can end up with a planet that's barren of all life. I mean, that's easy to see happen, and that's why the good spirits on the spirit side are saying, look at humanity, you have to get your act together. And it's not just, we have to make sure not only are we doing what we have to do for ourselves, but we have to make sure our neighbors, which includes neighboring countries, get their act together as well. We have to really pull together. Otherwise, we're going to end up crashing and burning, which is what they don't want to see happen, but it's entirely possible.
Now, here's the big question, though. Okay, little old Jim Harold sitting there, or Garnet up in British Columbia, or any one person. I mean, how can we impact these big issues? I mean, what can we do?
Well, I think we have to, kindness and love has a ripple effect. And so you think, here, I'm one person, what can I do? But I think you just go about your life and try to do random acts of kindness, spread your love, control your negative emotions, and hope that ripple effect will continue to spread. Eventually, it may make its way over to North Korea. Don't know, but it's certainly worth a try. And we have to start sort of in our own little sphere, first of all, and then hopefully it'll ripple outward. Now, there are some people, obviously, who have more influence than you and I do, Jim, like President-elect Trump. He's going to have a huge influence on the world, and we got to hope that he will, take up the message and try to embrace this feeling of hope that's coming from the spirit side in terms of how he deals with North Korea and Iran and some of the other places.
Now, how do we start this journey? I mean, sometimes if I'm having a good day, I think I'm a pretty nice guy, and I hold doors open for people and try to do nice things. And then some days I wake up and I'm a pretty grumpy Gus, I guess you'd say. And I'm like, I don't, and I think we all have our good days and bad days. But how do we start taking those little steps if maybe we're a little crankier than we think we should be?
Well, you just have to recognize that negative emotions are a big part of humanity, of a human body. I mean, they're there, and they're always going to flare up. You know, somebody cuts you off in traffic, and your reaction is to deal with them angrily, flip them the bird or whatever. You have to sort of recognize that these things do flare up, and then just say to yourself, okay, I'm going to replace these negative emotions with love and forgiveness and compassion. And amazingly, it does start to work. You have to practice a bit, Jim, but it actually does start to work. And I found myself, before I met Albert, I'd be the first one to swear and curse at somebody who cut me off in traffic. Now when it happens, I kind of just sort of, take a deep breath, and I catch myself and say, okay, this guy's on a journey. Who knows what happened to him today or last week? So just get on with it, and don't let the anger sort of fill up your day. It used to fill up my day. I would still be thinking about this traffic incident when I went to bed that night, which is just totally wrong, totally bad for all of us. And that sort of negativity spins off to people we meet during our workday. You know, like negative things have a ripple effect, just like positive things do. And so it's really a matter of focusing on what you have to do, and trying to stifle your negative emotions when they flare up.
It's interesting because if you think about it, you thinking about that guy that cut you off in traffic 10 hours later when you go to bed, that's really not directly impacting him. You're eating yourself up. And it's one of those things where you're hurting yourself more than you're hurting them. Of course, you have that ripple effect, but you're hurting yourself more than you're hurting them.
Oh, absolutely. But it's a matter of trying to recognize that, and doing your best to sort of get the negative thoughts out of your mind and think positive thoughts, loving, compassionate thoughts, and then it'll help yourself, but also the people around you. Because, when the guy cuts me off in traffic, I might come home from work and yell at my kids or say something mean to my wife or whatever. And that just, like you say, it just ripples. And so, not only is it good for you personally, in terms of your well-being, but it also helps the people around you. So it's very important to just stifle the anger, stifle the hate, and try to embrace love and compassion.
Now, when you talk about, for example, Albert, who does Albert work for, do you think?
Well, he works for, there's a committee of very advanced souls in the spirit side called the Council of Wise Ones. Their job is to oversee all the incarnations on our planet. And so he was enlisted by them, and they asked him to be sort of one of their messengers to send messages to humans on Earth. I'm one of his messengers. He has many, doesn't tell me who the other ones are, but his job is to try to spread the message of love and hope from the spirit side and try to get us over this hump, so that if enough people embrace love and compassion and discard their anger and hate, we can actually carry on and move up to the next level, and we won't end up destroying ourselves. So he works for those people who want to, save humanity on our planet.
Here's kind of a tough one. I can certainly see how we can be kinder and gentler to people who cut us off in traffic, or maybe slam the door in our face, or the kind of these slights that while annoying, don't impact us in a great way. But how can we be more kind, if that is a word, to those who really wish us ill? I mean, that's a very difficult thing to do. If somebody breaks into your house and threatens your family, or does, God forbid, these acts of terror or any of these things, I mean, how do you kind of take this philosophy and apply it to those people? Because certainly if somebody, in my view, if somebody does something illegal, or they've hurt people or something, they should be punished by the law and so forth. I mean, I think that's reasonable. But I mean, how do we show more forgiving spirit to the kind of these, for lack of a better phrase, big sins? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you have to start off by recognizing that the person who's committing the crime or threatening you is basically a soul just like you, having a human journey. And you don't know where they've been before. You don't know the challenges they faced. You don't know what past lives they've had. You don't know what was sort of on their agenda when they came incarnated here. So you have to sort of recognize the fact that this person is struggling, trying to figure out what to make of their life on this planet. And sometimes they just go off on the wrong tangent, and they let their negative emotions get away, and they end up committing crimes or threatening you or harming your family. So very difficult to forgive them, but you have to forgive them. That's part of it. It doesn't mean that you have to stand back and be a pacifist and let somebody, if they punch you, to turn the other cheek. You can defend yourself, you can defend your family, defend your country, but at the same time, you have to forgive the perpetrator for what they've done, and recognize that as I said, they're a soul just like you. And in fact, you and that person are all intimately connected to each other and to the source. And so it's really, once you recognize sort of the groundwork in terms of why we're all here, then it becomes a little bit easier. But it's never easy to forgive somebody who has caused you harm, not just human nature. That's one of the big struggles we have, but that's something that we really have to do to get over this crisis point.
An interesting case in something like that is there was a recent movie. I haven't seen it yet, but it's called Hacksaw Ridge. And it's the experience of a gentleman who is a pacifist, but he decided he would serve his country as being a combat medic. And he basically saved all of these people. So he really was a patriot, and he did service his country, and he actually was the first conscientious objector to be awarded the Medal of Honor. Now, obviously, I don't think any country would survive if everybody is a conscientious objector, particularly in something that really was, I believe in my mind, a moral struggle, the Second World War, to beat Nazism and the like. But the point is that this man really took his philosophy of nonviolence, but he still served his country and did something incredible. A story like that is amazing to me, how you can turn what some people might consider as a weak, quote, weak standpoint and really turned it into something very powerful and stronger than probably something that most of us will ever come close to accomplishing. Just amazing.
Yeah, I haven't seen the movie, but I understand that is what happened in the movie. I'm going to see it at some point. But I think that's just a very good example of how one person through their actions can actually have a big effect on other people around them. And in this case, an effect on his whole country when they recognized what he did, and he was awarded a medal. So those kind of examples are important, and we should all strive to do that. Although it's not easy for most of us, but we have to really try to do that.
What do Albert and the guides say is our biggest pitfall, do you think, in humanity?
Well, there's no question the biggest pitfall, as I mentioned, is that we let our negative emotions control our lives. Anger, fear, hate, greed. If you look at all the problems in the world today and over the history, it's either driven by anger, hate, or in a lot of cases just outright greed that causes a lot of the wars and the conflicts and the violence and so on. I mean, back to my example, somebody cuts me off in traffic. There's the example of the case recently in Louisiana. Road rage, got into a fight, and one guy ends up being shot. Well, that's just anger totally out of control. I mean, and so that's the biggest problem we have. Everything that's wrong on our planet stems from our negative emotions getting out of control. If we had nothing but love and compassion and forgiveness, we'd have an idyllic society. We're not there yet. We're far from it, but we have to really strive to not only control our negative emotions, but to convince other people around us, our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, to do the same. And hopefully that sort of mission, that sort of feeling will ripple out and hopefully affect all the right people at some point, especially the people who have the power to really cause a lot of havoc in our world.
Now, I understand that in connection with this book, or you recount in this book, some astral journeys you took with Albert, who took you to meet different souls on the spirit side. Can you tell us about some of those souls and some of those experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the interesting ones for me, I was raised as a Roman Catholic, and of course, Christians, the whole religion is centered around Jesus Christ. Well, Albert took me to meet Jesus Christ one time on the spirit side. He's a master soul, a very wise and advanced soul. Was back then, still is. He told me that he incarnated on Earth like over 2,000 years ago, at the request of the Council of Wise Ones, because they felt they needed somebody who was very advanced and very powerful to incarnate and try to help humankind sort of take the next step up the spiritual awareness ladder. And they felt that we needed some help. So he was asked to volunteer. He did, came down to Earth. He said that because he's a master soul, he was able to focus his thoughts into very powerful beams of energy. That's how he created his miracles. It wasn't because God or the source was listening to him and manipulating things. He did it himself. So he walked on water, turned water into wine, raised people from the dead. He did that, he said, to make a very dramatic statement to his followers because he wanted people to listen to him and his message and hopefully learn from it. So he did all those things to gather his followers. And he said, he expected that there would be a religion, a church developed from his teachings. He didn't know how it would turn out. He says that they've done a lot of good things, the Christian church, since his death. They've also done a lot of goofy things, and they strayed off course in a lot of cases. And, just because some of the men who followed him, the leaders of the church, had their own agendas. So he doesn't like some of the things that happened, but he thinks that it's done a fairly good job. And he was glad he did it. And I said to him, well, if you could create miracles, if you could, walk on water and do all those things, why didn't you save yourself from dying on the cross? And he said, I could have had I chosen to, but I thought that my death on the cross and then my resurrection would make a very dramatic statement for my followers. And so I let it happen, knowing, of course, that I knew where I was going. I was going back to the spirit side, and that this physical body was just a temporary vessel for me. So I wasn't worried about that. I knew I was going back to the peace and splendor of the spirit side. So I did it very specifically to make a dramatic statement. So that was a very interesting conversation. The other person that I also met actually at the same time as I talked to Jesus, and you'll find this strange because I sort of gulped when I saw the two of them sitting together, was the other person sitting beside Jesus was Adolf Hitler. And I thought, how can you have these two polar opposites? One is a paragon of virtue, the other one is an evil monster. How come they're sitting on a bench here having an amicable conversation? And so I found out, and I talked to the soul who had been Adolf Hitler. He was sitting there in his military uniform looking very much like how he looked on the newsreels. And then he morphed back into his what he called his natural state as a young man named David. And he said, yes, I had incarnated as Adolf Hitler. I'm horribly sorry for all the harm I did. He said that it wasn't planned for those things to happen. They happened because he let his negative emotions, his greed, his hate, his anger get out of control. And that's how he caused all the deaths. And he said it was a horrible thing, and that he was very anxious to get back into another incarnation on Earth to try to make amends, to balance out all the huge negative karma he accumulated. And but one of the things he said that a lot of people will find very strange, Jim, is he said that since he went back to the spirit side, he has met with the souls who died in his camps, his death camps, and he says there has been total reconciliation, because he says that when souls get back to the spirit side, there's no hangover of anger or need for revenge, no matter what happened. So, for example, if somebody murders you in this life, Jim, when you get back to the spirit side, you will be you'll have nothing but unconditional love for your perpetrator. There won't be any hate or anger, because none of that exists on the spirit side. So, once you're back in the spirit side, there is total forgiveness. It's easy to forgive because that's just the natural state of affairs there. So that was sort of an eye-opener for me to see Jesus Christ and Adolf Hitler sitting together on a bench and having a very friendly conversation.
Now, this is a perfect example of where, for me, it would be very difficult. In other words, I can understand on the face of it where somebody like a Hitler, I mean, if you follow the teachings of Jesus, all can be forgiven. Maybe not forgotten, but forgiven. To me, it would personally be very, very difficult to forgive a Hitler or a Jeffrey Dahmer, or, somebody who has really harmed many, many people or done a really heinous act. So I understand it academically, and I understand what you're saying. It just seems like a kind of a bridge too far. That's where maybe, for example, I personally fall short of that ideal.
Well, your reaction is very understandable, Jim. A lot of humans have the same one. And I've had a lot of people scoff at when I tell them the story about, Hitler and his death camp victims, having total reconciliation on the spirit side. And they say, well, that's not right. That's not fair. Furthermore, what is Hitler doing in heaven? He should be in hell. Well, the short answer is there is no hell. Everyone goes back to the same place, no matter what they did, including Hitler and the terrorists and everyone else. And Albert says it's difficult for humans to accept this because we're so used to thinking that if somebody harms you, it's okay to want revenge, to want punishment. But he said on the spirit side, souls have a totally different perspective of what happens on our planet. He said they view it as like if you're acting in a play, Jim, and the script calls for you to stab and murder another actor, when the curtain goes down, you don't get arrested by the police for murder because it was just play acting. And furthermore, the actor that you stabbed, I mean, there's no animosity because it didn't really happen. And so the souls on the spirit side, they look at life on earth the same way, because no matter what happens, everyone comes back home to start anew and pick out a new life. And so it's a very different perspective, something that's difficult for us to understand.
Certainly difficult to understand, but interesting perspective. Now, also, I understand you got to view an ancient human civilization. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was one of my trips. Albert took me to the Akashic Records, which, as you know, Jim, contains the history of every life that's ever been lived in the universe. And so we went in there, and this is sort of like a building where there's various viewing rooms, and there's sort of like a holographic globe that sort of Albert could control, and it could show me various scenes from past lives. Well, he showed me a human civilization that actually lived among the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And it was very interesting because it was a civilization that lived very close to nature. They had true equality. The men and women shared all the duties. And so it was really an equal society in every sense. They lived in a sort of a walled city with very high walls to keep out the aggressive dinosaurs. And I watched in fascination as there was a hunting party, half men and half women, who actually, I watched them sneak up on a herd of hadrosauruses and eventually kill one with their spears. They quickly cut it up and put it on poles and headed back to their village. And they managed to make it in through the doorway and slam the door before a T-Rex that was following the scent came after them. And so it was very, there was no violence, no crime. They ate only what they needed to survive, and they used every bit of the animals that they hunted. And then unfortunately, what happened was that through no fault of their own, they disappeared when the asteroid hit the Yucatan Peninsula 65 million years ago, kicked up a bunch of dust and smoke, started volcanic eruptions all around the Earth, and what followed basically was a nuclear winter for 2 or 3 years. Most of the dinosaurs, as you know, got killed off. And unfortunately, this human civilization that was only in one spot in Central America. It got buried under 200 meters of lava, which is why nobody's found them. But anyway, the anthropologists who always say that we didn't exist 65 million years ago, they were wrong, and that's just because they haven't found evidence of this civilization.
And there's some other things. For example, through these journeys, you got to see the building of Stonehenge and the crash of the Roswell crash. I mean, those are two remarkable touchstones in history.
Yeah, absolutely. Stonehenge was particularly fascinating. Again, it was in the Akashic Records. I was viewing a past life I had as a Druid priest on the Salisbury Plain, 3000 BC. And as I'm watching this, one night, me as that Druid priest had a dream, a vision, where somebody came to me and said I had to go to a certain spot on the plain the next day to meet a visitor, from the stars. So I did, and there I watched a spaceship sort of slowly hover down, touch down. Out came a human. It was a human in every respect, except he was about 8 feet tall, and his name was Mogons. And he said that he came from a planet many light years away, and that he wanted to enlist my help to get the villagers to help him build a structure that he could use as a navigational beacon. This was a beacon to allow ships in warp drive navigate, through the stars. And this particular location was on a galactic ley line, which was very important to them. And so then with his help, he wrote out a parchment with very detailed drawings of what he wanted to be built. The structures which is now known as Stonehenge, they were special stones that were quarried from a couple different sites many, many miles away. And so I organized the villagers as the Druid priest, and we went to these quarries, and then with the help of laser cutting tools and anti-gravity wands, they were able to cut the stones and then move them over to the site on the Salisbury Plain, erect them in the circles that now form Stonehenge. They were much more complete in those days, of course. And then when all that was done, he took out a power box from his ship, placed it in the center, turned it on, and he said now the beacon was running. And of course, the villagers didn't know the true purpose of that. They used it for religious ceremonies and so on through the ages. A couple hundred years after the beacon was started, he came back and pulled away the power box, saying that this beacon was no longer needed. So that's not there. But some of the stones that were originally there in Stonehenge, of course, are still there. And that's how Stonehenge was built. You can do amazing things, even primitive men, if you get help from your friends from the stars with advanced technology. And that's what happened. Very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I think that when you look at something like that, or you look at the Great Pyramid or different things that happened in history, how in fact did they do things that in some ways we can't do today at all, or with an extreme amount of technology that would take to do these things. And then also you mentioned Roswell. What was going on there? What did you see there?
Well, what I saw was a small spacecraft, that came out from the large mother ship. And it was coming to explore a high altitude weather balloon that the military had launched. and for some reason they had a equipment failure. I guess even they can have equipment failures. And so instead of coming to a stop in front of the balloon, it actually slammed into the balloon, causing the balloon to crash and head down. That crash knocked out another aspect of their navigation system. They ended up crashing in a desert below. They touched down and then skipped a couple times like a flat stone on the surface of the water, eventually coming to rest. And inside there were three little aliens. They were about 3 feet tall, and they were in shiny suits. And two of them, it seemed, died on impact. One was sort of moving. It eventually ended up opening the door to the spacecraft, but couldn't get out. Very soon after that, the Army trucks and jeeps and so on from the Roswell Army base came there. They went inside, retrieved all three of the little guys, and took them off to the Army Air Base. Put the damaged spacecraft on the back of a flatbed truck, covered it with a tarp, and hauled it away. And they went to the Roswell Army Air Base, where the one that was still alive was worked on by some of the doctors there for quite a while. They tried to save him, but in the end they couldn't, and so he died. And all three of them were sent from there off to Edwards Air Force Base for a while, and then eventually to Area 51, where their bodies are still preserved in preservatives, and the spacecraft is still there in Area 51 as well. And so when the Army, after the incident, when some people said that a spacecraft had crashed, and a few people did see it, the Army said, no, it was just our high weather altitude balloon that had crashed, and they held up remains of this balloon. And they were right, that balloon did crash, but they didn't show the whole story, because there was also an alien craft that had actually triggered the collapse of the balloon. So it was very interesting. Roswell did happen. There was a survivor for a while. They still have the alien bodies and the spacecraft in Area 51. Our scientists have not been able to figure out quite what made it work in terms of this propulsion system, but it's still there.
Fascinating. It's been a great discussion. Our guest has been Garnet Schulhauser. The book is Dance of Heavenly Bliss. Garnet, where can people find not only the book, but information about everything that you do?
Well, the best source, Jim, is my website, which is garnetschulhauser.com. That's hard to remember, so if you Google Dance of Heavenly Bliss or Dancing on a Stamp, you can get to my website. There's information on all three of my books. You can download a free excerpt of each one. You can watch a book video of all my books. You can dial into all the radio show recordings that I've done on one of my pages, where you can listen to every one I've done. This is show number 115 for me, Jim.
Wow.
All the recordings are there. You can also dial into my social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and find out what's going on in my life. And there are buy links on my website to all the popular online stores like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and many others around the world. All you have to do is click on there, and you can get right to the place where you can buy my books. So all the information is there. My email address is on my website, Jim, and I'd be happy to hear comments or questions from your listeners.
Well, Garnet, I thank you very much. It's always an interesting conversation. The book is Dance of Heavenly Bliss. And Garnet, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Jim.
And may your existence be a dance of heavenly bliss. We thank you for joining us today on The Other Side, and we'll talk to you next time. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.